When he heard his wife's car finally pull into the garage, he glanced at his Fitbit to check the time, 8:17 p.m. He grimaced. This was the third time this week that his wife had come home late from work. Until 4 months ago, she had never come home late in the 7 years they'd been married. Gray wasn't born yesterday, nor the day before. He didn't think much of it at first when Kelly had called to let him know she'd be late. But one evening, when she came home later than usual, he noticed her lipstick was slightly smudged, something almost unheard of, as Kelly was almost obsessive about her appearance. He was pretty sure he detected another man's aftershave as she leaned in to kiss him hello. That night, as they lay in bed, he intentionally nuzzled up to her neck while spooning her from behind. Gray didn't know much about fragrances, but he knew there was a clear difference between the scent of the aftershave he used and whatever the hell she was wearing. Gray nearly gasped when his auburn-haired wife walked in. He felt that she was just as beautiful as the first time he saw her in college. His reaction to her was always the same, no matter how many hours they had spent apart. Kelly smiled to herself when she saw her husband's usual reaction. She knew it was a sincere compliment. It also aroused her to know that her husband still found her alluring after she had been with another man's lips. "Hey, sweetie," she said, strutting over to him, giving him a quick kiss on the lips, then turning to head upstairs. Her unseen smirk was both confident and condescending. "Just need to get comfy. I'll be down in a minute." Gray didn't say a word while his wife breezed past and headed upstairs, not that she seemed to notice. However, he noticed a familiar scent of aftershave. Not for the first time. He furrowed his brow as she climbed the stairs, dreading the upcoming confrontation that he knew would happen soon if he was going to save his marriage. At this point, Gray was pretty sure his wife hadn't completely crossed the line with the man she called the Prince of Paco Rabanne, as he thought of her potential seducer, but he believed she had been moving closer to that line for some time. Gray had always feared that his beautiful wife would eventually realize she had married beneath herself in terms of looks and would seek to remedy that situation. Gray didn't think of himself as ugly, but his average looks were nowhere near the same league as his spectacularly beautiful wife's. The man walking into the Garden of Eden was named Johann. Kelly was an assistant vice president at an international telecommunications firm, and Johann was a well-built, 40-year-old blonde vice president who had transferred in from the firm's headquarters in the Netherlands about 6 months ago. Gray heard more about the Dutch transfer than he wanted to, especially during the first 2 weeks before Kelly went completely radio silent about him. "Hey, that new Dutch guy's still in your office?" Gray asked one evening during dinner, when Kelly was talking about her day. "Yeah." "Why do you ask?" she replied, somewhat confused. "Well, for a few weeks, he was the only one you talked about. Now it's like he's disappeared completely," Gray said. "He works in another department. We don't see each other much," she said, her face coloring more than a little. "Huh," Gray mumbled, shoveling a bite of food into his mouth, as he noted that his wife had just lied to him. The late night started soon after. Kelly found herself attracted to the 6 feet 4 inches, 225 pounds Dutchman from the moment she was introduced to him. As much as he was a physical specimen, he projected an air of extreme confidence, almost bordering on arrogance. He spoke 3 languages and had deep blue eyes that Kelly felt seemed to look right into her soul every time he glanced at her. If she was honest with herself, she had to admit she felt something for him the first time Johann smiled at her. In truth, Kelly and Johann didn't work in different departments, and they actually interacted quite a bit in their jobs. Within a couple of weeks of Johann coming on board, the two started going to lunch together. Kelly loved her husband and never gave a second thought to what was becoming a burgeoning relationship with Johann. For his part, Johann was very aware of the fact that his relationship with Kelly was growing, and he was gently pushing it that way. Johann knew Kelly was married, but he figured she'd let him know if he was pushing too far. Extramarital affairs were not uncommon in his country. 2 weeks later, the pair was working on a project that wouldn't be finished by the end of the day. Johann suggested they could either pick it up first thing in the morning or just put in a little extra time that evening at the office. Kelly's smile told him everything he needed to know. She quickly called Gray at his office to tell him she'd be a couple of hours late. It was the first time she'd ever been late since starting at her company. Since Gray sometimes worked late himself, he had no complaints and told her he would fix dinner. That evening, she gushed over how considerate he was. The two left the office at 7 o'clock, even though they had finished their work by 5:30. They were both aware of the time. Working, or rather, staying late, started to become a regular thing for the pair, who spent much of their extra time talking. At first, that evolved into touching, cuddling, and kissing. Kelly was completely aware that she was teetering on the edge of a slippery slope, but she enjoyed having both a husband and a boyfriend. In fact, she was so caught up in her own feelings that she was either unaware or uncaring that her husband had noticed. He could always go back to school in a couple of years, she reminded him. Kelly always seemed to come up with something big the couple needed to spend their money on instead of Gray's MBA. He didn't want to appear selfish, so he always agreed to his wife's wishes that Kelly's ego enjoyed being the major breadwinner and having the bigger job between the two of them. She began to see herself as a more dominant partner in their relationship. Kelly had butterflies in her stomach as she descended the stairs. She loved her husband, but she needed Johan. She needed to feel him, to spend the night with him, to snuggle with him after they'd been intimate. She just couldn't cheat with him. She had to tell her husband first, so it wouldn't be considered cheating. She knew he loved her as much as she loved him, and he would give her this one weekend, this hall pass. He had never denied her anything. Dinner's in the microwave. Just zap it for about a minute, Gray said flatly when Kelly appeared downstairs. Thanks, babe. I'll get it in a bit. Can we talk? She asked. Gray raised his eyes from his book. Dirk Pitt could wait. He could tell Kelly had something important she wanted to say to him. Did it have something to do with what he wanted to talk to her about soon? I want a hall pass this weekend, Kelly said hesitantly but clearly. Gray sat frozen on the sofa, his mind racing. He hoped he didn't look as stunned as he felt. He felt like his insides wanted to come out. Pardon me, he asked, knowing he had indeed heard his wife correctly. I need to spend the entire weekend with Johan Mann. We have feelings that need to be addressed. Just once, Gray. I love you, not him. And I'll come back to you after this weekend and spend the rest of my life showing you just how much I love you. Gray felt even sicker to his stomach. By just asking, Kelly had ended their marriage. Still, he figured this tragedy had to play out. What if you decide after this weekend that once isn't enough, he asked. What if you decide you need him more than one weekend? What if you decide you need him more than me? That won't happen. I promise, she said quickly. Really? How can you promise that? You promised me. You vowed that you would forsake all others for me 12 years ago, and you're going to break that promise? She colored again, looking everywhere but directly at him. I need this, Gray. I know you love me enough to give this to me, she whispered. To be exact, Kelly, you don't need this, but you certainly want it. And you're hoping I'll be stupid enough to give it to you. Not going to happen, he reiterated. But I don't own you, so if you really want to do it, you can. Just remember, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Thank you, Gray. I'm glad you understand, Kelly said. No, babe. Don't try to pretend you don't understand me completely. I just told you to do what you feel you must do, and then I'll do what I must do, he said. Whatever, she replied once he was done eating. Gray went upstairs to the master bedroom with several large trash bags. He spent the next 30 minutes throwing all of Kelly's clothes haphazardly into the bags, then walked them downstairs and placed them by the front door. He took a little more care with her jewelry and toiletries, placing them in a box and setting it by the door. Satisfied to a degree, but angry beyond description, Gray went back downstairs, put a DVD into the player, and settled in to watch his favorite all-time movie, the Mel Brooks classic Young Frankenstein. Kelly and Johan had barely gotten back into their room when Johan crushed his lips to hers. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and the two stood there passionately for about a minute. From what she had observed through his suit pants at the office, Kelly thought Johan would be a little bigger and thicker than her husband, especially when you factored in Johan's size advantage. He had 6 inches and 40 pounds over her husband. But as Johan's size became more evident, Kelly noticed that it didn't surpass what she had expected. She had heard her friends talk about the difference between a grower and a shower, but she hadn't paid much attention. Now, as Johan's situation progressed, it became clear that there wasn't much difference in size compared to her husband's, leaving her with a sense of unmet expectations. The next day, Saturday, the pair were scheduled to enjoy a day of activities before another high-end dinner and then carnal activities. Kelly was hoping that the previous evening was just a one-off. Gray spent the entire day on Saturday by himself, not even turning on his television until the sun went down. No matter how he looked at his dilemma, he couldn't see any way that he could stay married to his wife. He knew he still loved her. That didn't magically disappear in a day. But he couldn't brook the disrespect she had recently shown him, nor would he ever trust her again. He couldn't wait for her to claim a hall pass whenever she wanted intimacy with some other guy. A rerun of Leave It to Beaver was playing on the screen in front of him, but it could have been adult videos for all Gray cared. He took another swig of beer and stared straight ahead, his brain returning to happier times with Kelly. To be truthful, Gray was never quite sure how the two wound up together as business majors in the same year at Arizona State University. They had several classes together, but Gray never suspected that the stunning young woman even knew who he was. She always seemed to have a small posse of admirers around her, but early in their junior year, she pulled up the seat next to him in an honors accounting class. She seemed to go out of her way to flirt with him during class, and to his shock, she asked him out for coffee when the class ended. Of course, Gray said yes. The pair was inseparable for the rest of their college years, and married about 6 months after graduation. Up until a few months ago, Gray was sure the couple was in it for the long haul. Recent events, however, had shown him cracks in the marriage, and then Kelly had done the unthinkable. Kelly was lying in bed next to a sleeping Johan, wondering how much sucking up she would have to do to get her husband to forgive her. The weekend was out of time, and she heard the words her husband had said to her when she asked for the hall pass. But she knew Gray loved her too much to let a weekend destroy their marriage. Still, she never thought she would have to worry about her husband while she was with Johan. The day out with Johan was marvelous. He had great manners and a great presence. But back in the room for the second night, his presence again seemed to leave him. He was selfish and wooden, even though Kelly was giving him the benefit of the doubt in her head. I annoyed Gray for this, she thought to herself. God, I am an absolute dumbass. After a shower and a nice brunch, Johan was all smiles as he and Mrs. Mann checked out of the hotel. Kelly was gracious and smiled the entire time. The two shared a passionate kiss in the parking lot. Kelly thought it was the most passionate part of the weekend before each got into their cars for the drive home. Kelly used her hour-long drive home to clear her head and reinforce her position in what she was sure would be an ongoing debate with her husband over her hall pass. She was convinced Gray would eventually give in, despite his initial anger and threats. After all, she almost always got her way with him. If worst came to worst, she thought, she would order some lingerie and catch up. She couldn't help but smile as she thought about how easy it was to sidetrack a man. Kelly pulled her car into the garage, shut off the engine, and double-checked her makeup in the rear-view mirror. She grabbed her bag out of the back seat, took a deep breath, and marched, head held high, into the house. "Hey, I'm home," she called out as she entered the kitchen from the garage. She waited a couple of seconds for Gray to greet her, as would have been normal, but she was disappointed. She heard the big screen on in the family room and walked in, looking annoyed at what she considered her husband's childish behavior. Gray was seated in his recliner, watching a baseball game. He looked away from the screen for a second and nodded in her general direction, without so much as a grunt. Needless to say, she was not pleased. "That's how you're going to play this?" "Fine," she huffed, walking out of the room. "What the hell are all these bags by the front door?" she yelled when Gray didn't answer. Kelly walked over and opened a bag. She gasped, then heard more bags being opened. "Goddamn, this isn't funny, Gray." "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she cried. "Making it easier for you to move out when I serve you divorce papers," he responded, surprising her by coming up silently, almost right behind her. "No divorce. No divorce, Gray. We talked about this. It was one weekend. We've been married 12 years. You can give me one weekend. First off, we didn't talk. You talked, I listened. You told me you were taking a hall pass. Once it was my turn to talk, I told you I wasn't going to accept that. Not my problem that you didn't take me seriously. We're married. That means no hall passes ever," Gray asserted. "You would seriously divorce me for a weekend? After all the time we've been together, and all the time we'd be together in the future?" she asked, panic in her voice. "Now we won't be together in the future, since you did this. I told you this. What part of 'I will do what I have to do' did you not understand?" Gray growled. Tears started to leak from Kelly's eyes, for perhaps the first time in their marriage. Gray didn't move to comfort her. "You cheated on me with another man. Just because you told me first doesn't mean it's not cheating, especially after I told you not to do it," Gray said. "You didn't tell me not to do it. You told me I could make my own choices," she said, trying to twist the argument in her direction. "And face the consequences of your actions," Gray replied. "You seem to recall only what you want to recall." Kelly literally stomped around for several seconds, looking at her stuff in the bags. She was breathing heavily. "Well, I'm not moving out. This is my house too," she said. "Fine. But since your stuff is already bagged, you can move your stuff into the guest room." "I'm staying in the master," Gray said. "Fine," she grumbled, starting to haul the bags back upstairs. "You going to help?" she asked. "I already did my part." "I packed the bags," he answered. Gray went back into the family room and resumed watching the baseball game. He could hear his wife stomping around upstairs and muttering. When she finally came downstairs, Kelly flopped onto the family room sofa and went through the Sunday newspaper that Gray had placed on the end table near where she usually sat. She noisily started reading the paper, making sure it crackled every time she turned a page or shifted in her spot. "Aren't you going to at least ask me how my weekend went?" she huffed. "Why would I want to know that? I assumed you had intimacy with him several times. Isn't that what cheating women do when they cheat on their husbands?" Gray asked. "Well, we also went out and did things and ate at several nice restaurants," she whined. "Nice. I'm thrilled for you. Maybe one of your friends will be interested." "Your husband, for the moment, is not," Gray replied. Gray noticed his wife didn't seem nearly as thrilled as he would have expected, especially after she had made such a big deal about going. The fact that she wanted to talk about her experiences outside of intimacy told him that Johan might have been more of a dud than a stud. Not his problem, Gray thought to himself. Gray spent time on Monday splitting bank accounts and doing the financial maneuvering necessary for a pending divorce. He wasn't able to get an appointment with his choice of a family law attorney for another week, so he knew he'd have to live with Kelly in the same house for a while. Kelly spent her day ducking Johan. She was very aware that they were on opposite sides of the spectrum regarding the success of the weekend. She knew their relationship had changed forever, and not for the better. As much as anything, she desperately needed her husband to understand and come back to her, so she could use Gray to fend off future advances from Johan. Life had suddenly gotten very complicated for Kelly. She debated between having another sit-down with Gray or just letting life carry on as if nothing had happened, hoping her husband would eventually cool down. She opted for the second choice, as the path of least resistance, not looking forward to being called a cheating woman again by her husband. After some time spent looking at the situation from all angles, Kelly had to admit to herself that a cheating woman seemed much more accurate than a loving wife. She shook her head sadly, wondering if she would have seen things differently if her weekend had been a ringing success instead of a dismal failure. Gray never said a word to Kelly when he got home from work, nor when the two sat down to eat. He muttered a quick thanks when he finished and picked up his plate. "I'm sorry, Gray. I'm really sorry, Kelly whined as Gray started to move into the family room. After all these years, I guess I thought you loved me enough to give me a weekend. Loved you enough? Gray responded, I would have thought after all these years that you loved me enough not to ask for permission to be a cheating woman. How selfish and delusional can you be? Things got worse for Kelly the next day at work. 5 minutes after she got into her office, one of her best friends at her firm walked into her office and closed the door, a not too usual occurrence in the office. Please tell me you didn't spend the weekend with the Dutch store, Emma Law asked in a half-whisper, even with the door closed. Kelly's eyes opened wide. He's been bragging, she rasped, her face twisting in shame and anger. I'm assuming if it didn't come from you, it came from him, Emma said. But I did hear it from him. I heard a couple of the girls whispering about it in the break room while getting my coffee. If there's already whispering at 8 o'clock in the morning, it will be all over the office by noon. No way to hide it now. Kelly put her head in her hands. Emma watched as tears fell onto her desk. Yeah, you've become the cheating woman that every woman loves to hate, and every guy now wants to get a piece of. So how good was it? Emma inquired, raising her eyebrows. That's the biggest problem. It wasn't, Kelly replied. I annoyed my husband big time for what? She questioned. Johan is big and handsome and charming and an absolute dud in bed. He's hardly any bigger than Gray, and he's not half the man in bed. But he thinks he's God's gift to women. Emma's shocked look morphed into concern. So, how much do you have to make up to get back in your husband's good graces? She asked, with no hint of a smile on her face. I only wish it would be that easy, Kelly answered. Gray keeps talking about divorce. 7 years together, and he's going nuclear just like that. No, I'll think about it. No counseling, nothing. I thought he'd be annoyed, but he's mad. Off the hook mad. I've never seen him so unreasonable. It's not like I didn't give him a heads up. Yeah, but if he didn't approve of it, the heads up meant nothing. You're a smart woman. You really can't deny not knowing it could end up this way, Emma said. It was coincidental that Gray said almost the exact same thing to Kelly 2 weeks later, when she called in tears after she had been served divorce papers at her office. You told me I could have intimacy with him. You told me I could. She bawled through the phone. No, I told you that it was your choice, but there would be consequences. I never gave you carte blanche to meet that blonde bastard. You made it all about what you wanted. Apparently, it didn't matter what I wanted, Gray asserted. Gray received a phone call from his in-laws a couple of weeks later, pleading for him to talk to their daughter and consider reconciling. Gray liked his in-laws and had always gotten along well with them. He tried to let them down gently. She said she made a mistake and you won't talk to her. Won't let her explain. His father-in-law accused gruffly. You're a better man than that, Gray. She made a mistake? Is that really what she called it? Gray said, with more than a touch of irony in his voice. Well, she really never told us what that mistake was. But after 7 years, don't you think you owe her some courtesy? Ken Clayton said. She didn't tell you the whole story, Ken. I don't call giving herself a hall pass to have a co-worker for a weekend a mistake. I warned her there would be consequences, Gray said. Oh, no. She couldn't have been that stupid, Ken cried. Gray didn't feel the need to respond to what he was sure was more of a rhetorical comment. I'm truly sorry, Ken said. I don't know what else I can say. I won't be bothering you again. Gray groaned when he saw it was Kelly calling him the day after he spoke to her father. More excuses coming, he thought. I'm sorry for my dad calling Gray. I guess you found out that I wasn't exactly forthcoming with my parents. That's not the sort of thing you admit if you don't have to. I never thought he'd call, and I never thought you'd rat me out, she said softly. I didn't rat you out. I told the truth, he said without emotion. Yeah, she sighed. Kelly and her attorney tried to delay the divorce, but since Gray filed on irreconcilable differences and there were no children, it went through in 9 months. Kelly couldn't believe that Gray wouldn't give her a second chance after her mistake, as she called it. The mistake was way more than just having intimacy with another man, Kelly. He explained one evening when she tried to change his mind. You had an emotional affair long before you cheated with him. You disregarded my feelings. You disrespected me in the worst way. When did you stop loving me? Kelly sniffled back tears. Once upon a time, Gray used to try to comfort her when she cried. Now he accused her of trying to cry her way back into his heart. I know you still love me, Gray. Why can't we try to reconcile? I do still love you. That's why this hurts so much, Gray answered. But it's apparent to me that you don't love me nearly as much as I love you. I would have never considered cheating on you. Ever. But I could never trust that you wouldn't do this again the next time another man catches your fancy. There won't be another man, I promise, she interjected quickly. There shouldn't have been a first man, Gray grumbled. You promised that when you made vows to me. Oh yeah, she whispered. Johan asked Kelly out several times during the time the divorce was pending, as did several other co-workers of Kelly's. Being outed as a cheating woman made Kelly the talk of the office and got her called into human resources several weeks after the incident. We don't have a policy against employee dating, but we've always asked our employees to show a little discretion. When half the males on our staff are talking about you spending a weekend playing house with Johan Man, and half the females are speculating on who's next on your list, it's not a good situation. If the buzz doesn't let up, you might be asked to move to another office. They tell me Maine is very pretty this time of year, the human resources director said. Johan was back in Kelly's face a day later, again asking the woman for a date after being warned by the HR director. She was in no mood for Johan. Come on, baby. Your hubby's divorcing you. We don't even have to leave the city for the weekend, Johan said. Can't you take a hint? I blew up my marriage for some mediocre intimacy that I just had to have. I was such an idiot. Now go away, Kelly shrieked. 2 weeks later, Kelly accepted a job relocation to North Carolina. By the time she left, everyone in the company knew Johan wasn't the stud he thought he was. A month later, Johan transferred back to the Amsterdam office. He was a handsome, fit man who drifted through the aisles of the grocery store each Saturday morning, like a man in a daze. She noted from several feet away. He never seemed to notice her, which was a norm in her life. Margaret Scanlon, known as Peggy to her close friends, was a 5th grade teacher at a local elementary school. She was average-looking with an average body, thinking she had nothing to attract a good-looking, obviously single man. She was 29 and, in a few weeks, would turn 30 without any prospects for leaving the single life anytime soon. Peggy wondered how an attractive man like Gray could still be single. He appeared to be in his mid-30s, didn't give off the vibe of a player, and seemed lost, maybe broken. Gray Penner didn't wear a wedding ring on his left hand, but Peggy determined he was single long before looking at his hand. The articles in his cart told her everything she needed to know about his marital status. Pop-Tarts, frozen pizza, macaroni and cheese, beer, and meat for the grill. Nothing screamed single, maybe even divorced, like those items. Peggy was described by many as mousy. She had short, wavy, light brown hair, large brown eyes, and fair, almost pale skin. She was 5 feet 5 inches with an average-sized body, decent legs, and what she considered her best feature, a muscular butt. Personality-wise, she would have described herself as a wallflower in college. Her friends considered her the perfect wingwoman due to her friendliness, loyalty, and average looks. She first noticed Gray several months before and kept noticing him for reasons she couldn't explain. She started paying closer attention, and 2 months earlier, she found herself actually considering introducing herself to him. If only I knew. This might seem a little forward, but I'm Peggy Scanlon. Would you like to get a cup of coffee with me? Peggy asked a couple of weeks later when she came upon Gray. He backed up and took a good look at the woman who just accosted him verbally. Okay, she wasn't stunning like Kelly. Not many were. But there was something in her look that made him say yes. Something in her eyes that made him want to know more about this mystery woman. It was the first time in 2 years that he had considered a woman in more than just a friendly way. Yeah, I think that would be great, Gray brightly responded. Peggy Scanlon was an open book, an easy reader. She hadn't dated much in her 29 years, and never seriously. She seemed intelligent and well-read, and he listened attentively as she explained her past. When she finished her soliloquy, she sat quietly and waited for him to spill about his past. She watched his eyes carefully and determined he was single because he was divorced. His eyes revealed the pain that only someone who had been hurt deeply could know. She watched as he thought, seeing him try to figure out exactly how much of himself to reveal. He revealed virtually his entire story, and she sat in rapt attention when he finished. He sighed heavily, looking at her as if the weight of the world was lifted from his shoulders. "I'm sorry for hitting you with that," he said as he looked up. "You're the first person I've told the whole story to. I've been told I have that effect upon people. I'm also pretty good with little kids and dogs," she said. Gray chuckled. He felt very comfortable with this stranger, almost like when he was with Kelly before. Before the pair went their separate ways, Gray had a date for the following Friday night. The two had intimacy for the first time on their third date. Peggy was trying to hold out longer, but she proved to be the weaker partner. There was something incredible about Gray's quiet, understated demeanor. She couldn't resist, even though he never made an overt move. After a nice meal at a Hungarian restaurant, Gray took Peggy back to his apartment for coffee and after-dinner liqueurs. The two started out sitting close on a love seat in the living room before Peggy leaned into Gray and joined her lips to his. 10 minutes later, the pair was naked in Gray's bedroom. He noted to himself that this was the first time since his divorce that he had made love to anyone. The other times he had it were pure and simple intimacy. He made sure to kiss the woman throughout their lovemaking. She mumbled as she lay entwined with him after they finished. "It's all right. Plenty of time to talk later. What are you doing for the next few decades?" he noted. The woman who had been a bridesmaid 4 times finally got to be the center of attention. A year later, the two had a pair of children. First a boy 2 years after their marriage, then a girl another 2 years later. Unlike her predecessor, Peggy never forgot her vows. While Gray would never know it, Kelly never forgot that lesson again. Several years after moving to North Carolina, she remarried, remaining faithful to her second husband for 15 years until she caught him cheating. She admitted to herself that she finally understood the pain Gray endured and wasted no time in divorcing her second spouse. Kelly had always taken good care of herself and still went to the gym regularly. She was still an attractive woman as she approached 50, single, alone, and approaching 50. She never saw that coming, not even in her wildest dreams. Her second husband was a decade older than she was, had no children, and didn't want any with Kelly. Now it was too late. Although she knew there were plenty of 30-something men who would gladly put a baby inside her, none wanted to stick around and be more than just a sperm donor. She laughed aloud to herself. More of a bark, really. Gray had wanted 2 children, and Kelly had wanted 3. So by now, the couple's 3 children would all be in their teens. She and Gray would be attending various school and social events, sports, band, and PTA graduations, both high school and college. Weddings and grandchildren would come next. All of that was gone for a mediocre adventure. What an entitled, dumb woman I was, she thought as she shook her head sadly for probably the 1,000th time. If she was limber enough to kick her own back, she would. A few months later, halfway across the country, Gray and Peggy Penner, along with their 15-year-old son Reggie, were sitting in the gymnasium of their local high school watching their 18-year-old daughter, Phyllis, accept her diploma. Peggy squeezed her husband's arm, and the two exchanged looks, their eyes filled with happy tears. Gray leaned in and gave his wife a quick peck on the lips, causing their son to wince in teenage embarrassment. "Oh, come on, you too." "Not here, not now," he whined. His parents smiled at him, then at each other. They both wiggled their eyebrows.